Compared with 2008, feed prices are down. And although that's good news for cattlemen, it's important to remain focused on being a low-cost producer. The range and pasture specialists at Dow AgroSciences advise that paying special attention to the condition of your grazing lands can help ensure those acres are at peak production. Cattleman to Cattleman reporter Jim Witt has more.
We need look no further than 2008 to understand just what a significant role feed cost can play in any cattle operation. Providing ample, high-quality grazing can go a long way toward bringing stability to the cost side of the beef production ledger. Byron Slew is a field scientist with Dow AgroSciences. Based in West Des Moines, Iowa, he works with producers and grazing managers across the western Corn Belt.
Feed prices were very high last year, but one should not forget that still it doesn't matter what the price of feed really is. In today's world, having an animal graze is still the cheapest way to feed an animal. By most research that's out there, it shows that grazing is about 50% the cost of what feeding any kind of stored feed would be. So if you grow good, high quality, high quantity forage, that's going to be your cheapest alternative to putting weight on animals or have milk produced.
Slew says an early season evaluation of your grazing lands can help determine any management adjustments or strategies to help you get the most from those acres during 2009 and beyond.
Well, coming off of a summer where, for the most part, we had good moisture, there are also some pastures that were overutilized because a part of the growing season there was some flooding, so we weren't able to use all the pasture lands that were available. So we do have some pastures that are in rough shape going into this year. In addition to that, right now there are some pastures in some areas where we're getting melting snow. We've got unusually warm temperatures and cows are out on pastures, so they're being tracked up quite a bit. We're getting mud puddles in some areas, and that's just going to lead to weed invasion into next year, and grass stands may not be as good as they could be in some of those areas.
Charles Hart is a range specialist with Texas AgriLife Extension in Stephenville, Texas. He says it's especially important for producers and land managers to consider the previous year's grazing season while evaluating and managing this year's range conditions.
Well, I mean, obviously, I think you've got to start looking to the future, and we didn't have a lot of grass production this last year. The grass production the previous year has a big effect on what you're going to be able to do the following year. Everybody thinks, you know, it's just current conditions that have the greatest effect on what you can and can't do that year. But really, what the conditions were the previous year have a big bearing on how that year is going to play out in terms of what you're going to be able to do and what you're not going to be able to do. So I think we need to remember to factor that in on decisions that we make this year in terms of, what the conditions were last year.
Bill King knows what a limiting factor moisture can be. He also knows the value of quality grazing. King ranches and farms the arid, sandy soils near Stanley, New Mexico, where he runs 800 registered and 200 commercial cows. The King family also raises corn and alfalfa under irrigation, but they depend most on the native and improved rangeland that is the foundation of their cattle operation.
This valley here, we're about 6,200 feet elevation. Most of our grass is either grama grass, or we have a lot of old fields that were planted back to some blue stem and some different grasses that come a little earlier in the spring. So we try to move our cows out to grass in early April, and then we rotate them from the blue stem type in the planted pastures onto the grama grass pastures. Hopefully we'll get some rain in July and the grama grass will grow, and then we run on it until October, and then we move the cattle back into the fields.
With only 12 to 13 inches of annual rainfall and an ample supply of irrigated silage, corn, and alfalfa hay, it might be tempting to rely more on those harvested forages and less on their grazing resource. It's just the opposite, King says, especially considering today's cattle economics.
Well, the more expensive feed is, the more important that grass is, and so that's why we hope for rain so we don't have to use that feed, but we try to manage it so we can use as much grass as possible, especially on years when feed's this high.
So what kinds of steps should you consider this spring to help give your grazing acres the best opportunity to grow the most feed possible.
You know, you've got to be able to look at the rangeland too and start determining what is the health of that rangeland, just like you do the health of a cow out on the pasture. And so, you know, start looking at things like the amount of bare ground that you have out there. Is that increasing? Is that decreasing? You know, the pedestaling of plants and things, erosion increases, whether that's wind erosion or whatever. We can have erosion even in a drought.
Losing pasture and rangeland productivity certainly is a losing proposition for the cattle producer. SLU says weed control is an important tool that can help producers extract more value from their grazing resource.
Well, there are several problems that weeds in a pasture could cause for forage production. One of the first one is that you immediately reduce the grazing area that's available. For every pound of weed that's being produced, you're taking away resources that should have gone to grass production. The other side of the story is that some weeds are weeds that might have thorns or that might be poisonous, and right away you reduce the availability of forages around thorny plants like thistles, for example, or locust or multiflora rose. You reduce the access of animals to the grasses that are growing close to those.
When it comes to controlling undesirable plants on your grasslands, SLU recommends thinking beyond the weeds you see today to realize the greatest return on your herbicide investment.
In choosing your herbicide, it's very important to really think about what your weed problems are and what are the attributes that you're looking for after applying that herbicide. Most times we want to recommend a herbicide with a residual activity because you can apply the herbicide and not just control the weeds that are present at that time, but you offer also control into the growing season and potentially into the next growing season with the herbicides that you'd apply that provide residual control. For example, going out early in the spring or mid-spring with an application of Milestone on biennial thistles will provide control of some later emerging weeds, for example, ragweed, common ragweed, or in some instances if you have horse nettle later emerging, you will also have some residual control of those weeds.
As we look ahead through the 2009 grazing season, caring for the land, maximizing forage production, and maintaining management flexibility become extremely important.
In a cattle production system, as we've talked about before, the most effective and efficient way to feed your livestock as well as to get your bottom line in shape is to do so with forages, where they're grazing rather than you having to feed stored feed, whether it's silage, hay, or grain. And if you're going to be doing that, then you have to make sure that you have high quality and good quantities of that forage that's available.
The grass is the basis or the foundation of the ranch, and if we don't take care of that, then it's not going to be around, and it's not going to sustain us into the future.
For NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman, I'm Jim Witt.
The experts at Dow AgriSciences are always ready to answer your questions. For more information on the 2009 Grazing Outlook or to connect with the experts at Dow AgriSciences, visit cattlemantocattleman.org.